Ask a question to any of these next few speakers. We'll do it at the end of the session. So our next speaker is Bill Tufts. He spoke, I think he spoke at most of our conferences. It's never good news. I don't know why we keep inviting him back. Like my blood pressure goes higher every time I see you, Bill. But anyway, so be it. Please welcome Bill Tufts. He's going to talk about, who gets the pensions, who gets the liabilities. Go ahead. Welcome.
Thank you. I wonder if Chris was able to get that up.
I think so.
This is a wonderful event. For 6 years in a row, Paul Hinman, John Robson, Danny Hozack, and in the background, Pat, have run these conferences. We've been here looking at the big issues of the province, of the country. We've examined and looked at most of these issues that we've spoken about today. And back in the early summer, Danny and John said, you know what, there's going to be a firestorm in Alberta if Trudeau is elected. And they started preparing for this event. It was being prepared months ago, and their visionary, insights have brought us to this point today. And in fact, we do have a firestorm, and I'm here today just to look at one aspect of that, and that's the pension issue. So thank you very much for your hard work and efforts, John and Danny. It's been an excellent series of conferences. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of friends and get to know a lot of very good people who are now my friends. I got here as a result of a book that I had written called Pension Ponzi. It looked into public sector pensions, the amount of money that taxpayers put into those pensions, and the huge gap between what public sector employees receive for their retirement and taxpayers who are funding them. I'd like to recognize Catherine Swift, who is here today, and she was responsible for the title of the book, and also with her today is one of my solid co-workers on our organization, Fair Pensions for All, Nancy Bangsbull. And we're going to look today and see how pensions are basically run and operated to fund the UN goals and objectives of Agenda 2030 and its SDGs. One of the philosophies that we had running our organization was, I'll just paraphrase this here from Milton Friedman, was that changes in society are not usually made until there is a perceived crisis or an actual crisis. It's called the tyranny of the status quo. And we're here today to talk about what before was politically impossible, and today it's politically inevitable. What's Alberta future look like? In 1968, Canada was recognized as the second most wealthiest country in the world of G7 countries, and we were number 2 in per capita wealth. Today, we've fallen much lower on that list of world economies. We're now at number 15 of the OECD, which was a much bigger group than the G7, and we've actually seen incomes in Alberta falling over the last few years in what should be the wealthiest resource-based economy in the world. We all know what the numbers are in terms of the equalization and the amount of money that's going out every year, that $20 billion in excess payments to the rest of Canada over and above what we get back, and that's an important part of the dialogue, and it's probably what I hope very soon the referendum issue is going to be about. The firewall, it looks like it's a revisit of the firewall. In 2001, King Trudeau I had just been elected in Canada. And people were outraged about what was happening. And today we find ourselves right back at the same position where King Trudeau II has been elected. There were several items on that firewall letter that were going to mean the independence and ability of Alberta to direct its own future outside of the parameters and the restrictions that were put on us by Canada. The number one issue was going to be the pension plan. The pension plan, the CPP, was set up in 1965. At that point in time, all of the provinces were required to join the plan in order to fund the retirements of all Canadians, all working Canadians. And today it has a fund of about $400 billion. looking at what we would take out of that for Alberta would be about 10%. We're about 10% of the population, and that would give us $40 billion to put into an Alberta pension plan. We can see here, that's a little dark, I apologize, of how the CPP is investing its money today. 47% is going into North America, about 4% into South America, 21% into Asia, and the rest into Europe. We have some concerns about why Alberta should be opting out of the CPP pension plan and starting up our own pension plan, and that's based on the where they're investing their money today. They're supposed to be investing their money, our money, on a fiduciary responsibility to get the best impact and returns on those investments going into the CPP in order that all Canadians will have a solid and secure future. One of the things we look at is how could a $2 billion investment into low-income housing in Mumbai, India, guarantee those returns that we as Canadians need. This is one of the examples of the UN agenda and all of the other issues surrounding it. Certainly the climate change hysteria is solely directed, in my opinion, by the United Nations, and that's why we are dealing with it so hard today, and that has been brought to us by our current Prime Minister, who has promised he wants to make Canada a post-nationalist state. Recently, we were a little shocked to see that the CPP actually invested into Pattern Energy, which is a northeastern United States-based company that invests in windmills and wind turbines. Imagine if that $6 billion had been invested back into our economy, our resource economy, into Western Canada, into Alberta. That $6 billion would have gone a long ways to building us another pipeline and building us some tidewater ports that we can get our exports, our resources, into export markets. Those are a couple of solid reasons that we're looking at. And there's one more that's come up recently again, and that's the Chinese Belt Road Initiative. It's an initiative that's building infrastructure across all of the countries that are in between China and Europe. One of the challenges is that pension funds are suffering and challenged on how to find the rates of returns that they need that have been built into the programs, for example, in the 1965. One of the things that's happened is that bond rates have virtually collapsed, and they've typically been a fairly significant part of any pension portfolio, 30, 40%. However, with today's rates of returns, that's not available. In fact, in Europe, they actually have negative interest rates on bonds. So how are they going to achieve the rates of returns that they need to make the promises within their pensions? China has stepped in and said, well, when we build this infrastructure, we're going to give you enhanced rates of return that are going to help you get what you need in order to fund your pensions. And they're going into the countries that are along the route of the Belt Road Initiative, and they are very happy to get the money coming in. And we know what happens, to a lot of these banana republic countries. We've seen the money going into, the recent Arab state where SNC was involved in buying yachts and prostitutes in order to get their deals happening. And we are afraid that this is going to happen with the Belt Road Initiative. Those countries that are building the infrastructure are going to be hammered with never-ending infrastructure projects. We have a couple in Canada, the Site 1 project over in BC, out in Newfoundland. They have a Muskrat Falls that was originally budgeted to cost $4 billion. It's now up over, $4 billion, and it's now closing in on $14 billion. We see too many of these infrastructure projects that just continue to go on and on and on, and they have countries building the infrastructure like SNC, and we know the corruption that's happening inside of those. Slide ahead here. What do the contributions into the CPP from Alberta currently look like? We did asked CPP for a report to tell them what the funding is going into the CPP from Alberta, and that's another $8 billion a year. So you can put that on top of the $20 billion a year that we're already sending to other parts of Canada, and that's costing Alberta a lot of money. We have very healthy demographics. That means that our population, despite what we see in this room today, including me, has the youngest population in the country, so it costs less money to fund those pension liabilities. And so that means that, you know, we're probably overpaying into the CPP right now what we need to. Here's what the current situation in Alberta pensions looks like. There's about $100 billion in AIMCO. The significant portion of that has been put aside for the public sector employee union pensions, and they have $79 billion. The rest of it is the money that was put into the Heritage Fund. That was about $17.8 billion today or something like that. We would suggest to you that the resource wealth that was supposed to have gone into the Heritage Fund to benefit all Albertans has been in fact diverted into those public sector pension plans, where the public sector employees typically are going to be retiring at income twice or three times what an average Albertan retiree will receive. All of these major pension funds have been identified by the UN as the source of money that's going to be required in order to fund its SDGs and Agenda 2030. The first time I had heard about any of the UN challenges that we faced was actually at a conference here, and we had a group of landowners who were looking at Agenda 21 and the land expropriation that was involved with that. I thought, man, that sounds like sort of tin hat conspiracy stuff. However, as I continued along in my research looking at pensions and various aspects of what's happening in Canada, I kept flipping pages that just mentioned Agenda 2030, SDGs, all of the United Nations initiatives, and I would assert to you, as we've seen in the lunchtime presentation, that certainly the climate change hysteria is a function and been directly related to what's happening at the UN. So today, those pension funds, other sources of wealth, have about $100 trillion in them. The United Nations has estimated that in order to achieve its worldwide goals that are involved with Agenda 2030 are going to cost about $73 trillion. And they've set up ways of funding that it's all going to be coming out of pensions, and that's going to be the source of their income to fund the United Nations agenda. AIMCO has $110 billion, or $108 billion in it today, and it's we need to watch it because it is involved with that huge block of pensions around the world that have committed to funding the UN programs. Here was a recent report that they said the low-hanging fruit that was in the pensions, because it's consolidated into giant pools of money and because it's held by closely, related investment managers, would be an easy source to get at that money that's required for the UN initiatives. You can see here, as I know a lot of people in this room here are researching a lot of the issues that we talk about today, a lot about the United Nations agendas and issues, which sort of seems to be a taboo topic in the mainstream media. You'll see that colorful square up there that indicates and represents the SDG initiatives. This was published with the organization that controls all the worldwide pensions. It's called the PRI. They've taken the United Nations PRI out of it, but that seems to be where they're wanting to direct this money. I know that some of us are concerned about our pensions going into special interest investments in the province, but I suggest to you that we would be much better off holding that money inside of Alberta, where it can be directly focused on issues that are important to us, and investments that, rather than going to competitors, into all sorts of wacky ideas will be invested back into Alberta to make us once again one of the most wealthiest countries in the world. Well, I don't know if we'll be a country. I'm up here, I guess, talking about separation. But and so the implementation of the Alberta pension plan will be a very simple process. All of that money is pooled with the CPP. They probably have the $40 billion sitting in cash, so that technically speaking, it will be a very simple process. One of the challenges that we have, though, is that the political interests across the country will want to avoid losing that source of funding that Alberta is sending to them. So that'll be the battle, not the technicalities of setting up that pension plan, but the political realities. So along with that, with the other issues that were looked at in the firewall, letters and the concepts that we're developing here today, I think this is going to be a very historic moment for Canada and Alberta. And it's great to see everybody out today so interested and participating in this dialogue. It's going to take a lot of twists and turns along the ways. But I'd like to thank you all for being here and congratulate Danny and John on the work they've done. Is he here? Yeah, and one of the interesting friends that I met along the way at these conferences was Mr. Drew Barnes. I don't know if he was able to show up. He was coming in from town. Where is Drew?
Right at the back of the room.
Hey, Drew, come on up for a second. Drew has been given the honor of presenting or being on the panel of the new Blue Ribbon Committee for the Fair Deal for Alberta. I know that that's going to look at a lot of various issues. I would urge you, Drew, to look at the Alberta pension plan. I think that's one that's easy to do, and it was recognized as the first item on the original firewall. But just come up for a second, Drew, and maybe you can give us just a little. Yeah, you only got a minute. Danny's been running this thing so fast.
Thanks for coming, Drew. Yeah. Well, thanks, Bill. Just arrived from Medicine Hat, so glad to be here for the next day and a half with so many people, that care about our future, our families, our free enterprise, and care about our position of Alberta within Canada. But my hat's off, first of all, to Danny, Hozack, and everybody associated with the Education Association. My goodness, this is the 5th or 6th time I've been here in their 6th or 7th conference. This one looks so fantastic, from the agenda to the attendance. So please, let me wish everyone here a great day and a great chance to exchange some ideas and some education. I'll be here for a day and a half, and as Bill rather just mentioned, I'm grateful that I was just appointed to the Fair Deal panel, and I would love very, very much to hear every single idea that you have, and I'll do my best to be able to accommodate that. Have a great conference, everybody, and good work again, Danny.
Well said. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Drew. And thank you, Bill.